Hello and welcome to The Rest is Football with Alan Shearer, Micah Richards and me, Gary Lineker. This is not our usual podcast or output. It's not so much an emergency podcast, but more of a special podcast because the person we're going to be talking about is, I think, a very special person. He is a certain Roy Hodgson who has resigned as manager of Crystal Palace following a second visit recently to hospital. The good news is he's now home and feeling better, but he has stepped back, and tonight's important game at Goodison Park will be overseen by Ray Lewington and Paddy McCarthy. What a career Roy has enjoyed. Let me start by reading out the clubs that he's managed. He started at Halmstad. He then went to Bristol City as an assistant manager before being the main manager of Bristol City. He then went to a club called Oddervold, then Örebro, Malmo, Neuchâtel Xamax, then the Switzerland national team. Then he went to Inter Milan. Back to Blackburn Rovers, back to Inter as caretaker manager, Grasshoppers, Copenhagen, Udinese in Italy, United Arab Emirates, Viking, Finland, Fulham, Liverpool, West Bromwich Albion, Crystal Palace, Watford and Crystal Palace again. He was, of course, also in there the England manager for a while. It wasn't ultimately successful, but I think it's fair to say he didn't enjoy the depth of talent that is now available to Gareth Southgate. The club statement was as follows. Crystal Palace Football Club can confirm that Roy Hodgson has stepped down from his post as first team manager. Roy Hodgson said, "This club is very special and means so much to me and has played a big part in my footballing life. I have fully enjoyed my time here across 6 seasons, as it has given me the chance to work with top-class players and staff doing what I love every day. However, I understand given recent circumstances it may be prudent at this time for the club to plan ahead. And therefore, I have taken the decision to step aside so that the club can bring forward their plans for a new manager as intended for this summer. I would like to thank Steve Parish and his American partners for their support, along with my coaching staff and backroom team who have helped me so much along the way. In particular, a huge thank you to my long-term friend and assistant, Ray Lewington, coaches Dean Keeley and Paddy McCarthy, plus the excellent sports science, video analysis and medical departments. My thanks and respect also to the current squad of players who have been a pleasure to work with. They're a credit to the club and themselves. I'm certain that our fans will continue to give their full support to their team for the remainder of the season and beyond. I am confident that the season will finish well, and I wish the team every success in the weeks and months and seasons to come." As classy as always, Roy. The club said they would like to thank Roy for his outstanding service in which he managed 200 games across 6 seasons. Chairman Steve Parish said, "Roy has a special place in Crystal Palace history and this will never be forgotten. After 4 years in which he led the club to maintaining Premier League status season after season, he once again joined us nearly a year ago to steady the ship and worked wonders. That he then agreed to continue in the summer speaks volumes about his commitment to our club. Quite simply, we owe our continued Premier League status to Roy. I would like to thank Roy enormously for his service and wish him the very best for the future. It's fair to say Roy has the keys to Selhurst Park and will always be welcomed back. On a personal note, I would also like to thank Roy for his support, his professionalism and his friendship. He's been the manager for half of the time we've been in the Premier League. I've enjoyed working with him and learning from him immensely." Lovely words and beautifully done. And I don't know if you share this, Micah and Alan, but the fact that he's had this little illness and it's kind of, I think, probably made his mind up for him. It's a kind of a better way to go than perhaps be shown the door should they have had a few more bad results.
Yep, agreed. I think sometimes when you're in football, you're so in tune with what you got to do, being the best, going to training, working as hard as possible. But sometimes you just have to take a step back, don't you, and look at the bigger picture. He's 76 years of age. He's done what he is wanted in the game. He's a legend of the game. And now it's time for him to put his feet up. And we always have that desire to want to be in football whether it's coaching, whether it's manager, pundits, or actual playing. But now's the time for him to, go out at the very top. And yeah, it's a sad day for football because he did bring so much. Even when we was laughing and joking about when he was squaring up to people just in his recent history, he still got all the appetite for football, which is great to see. But ultimately, you've got to put your health first and your family.
Yeah, football is great, but life is better. And I am really pleased that he's decided to do that himself. He deserves to go out on his terms, no one else's, because of who and what he is. And you just read that list out of where he's been as a manager, and the stress. And I know that the finance and the money's always brought into it, but the stress that managers go through and that he's gone through it at various different places, albeit whether that's England or whether it's coming back to Crystal Palace again this season. But you know what? When you put all that to one side, he is a bloody good person, and he's a really, really nice bloke. And for him to go out on his terms, I'm pleased with that. He deserves that. And I hope he can take a rest and look back and think, wow, what a bloody amazing career he's had.
He really has an extraordinary career, hasn't he? So many national teams he's managed as well, with the pinnacle, obviously, of managing your own country. And I always think I've met Roy, obviously, on many occasions, and he's just not only a real gentleman, but he's also incredibly intelligent and articulate. And I always think he expressed himself well, even when things weren't going very well after matches, didn't he? Always found the right words for the occasion.
Classy man, full of class, wasn't he? We all know that the hurt that goes with football and how you feel after a game, but the vast majority of time, I mean, it must be so difficult to keep on biting your lip as a manager when things aren't going well for you. But more often than not, he always did that, and I think that sort of sums him up, who and what he is.
I suppose in all careers there are ups and downs, aren't there? And his was, a lot of ups and obviously some downs. Some, sometimes rising to the top, getting the Liverpool job, for example, which it didn't quite work out for him. And the same with England. With England, I kind of said it in my intro, didn't I? That he didn't have the players that they've now got. There's no question about that. But at that stage of England's career, well, apart from you, Micah, I presume that's why you suddenly developed a tickly cough. What was he like to play with, to play under?
Well, I did. He never called me up.
Sorry, of course not. Why were you coughing
that's why
there?
He's such a football-educated, great coach. He knows good players and bad players.
Not one call-up, Micah.
Not one call-up.
Honestly,
no.
He's just gone right. I mean, I couldn't have held him in higher esteem, but he's just gone higher now.
I remember you talking about he didn't call you up for the major tournament. I didn't realise he'd never got you into a squad.
It might have got me into one. I just can't remember it. I spat my dummy out like a big baby that I was at the time, and yeah, when he didn't call me up for the Euros after winning the Premier League.
Did you spit your dummy out publicly?
So basically, a little bit. So the reason why, for those who have not heard it, is because I wasn't he wanted me to go on standby. And he got Stuart Pearce to ring me. If he would have rang me himself and just told me, I would have respected him. We don't all like hearing the truth, but you can respect someone when they give you the truth. But he knew the relationship I had with Stuart Pearce, and Stuart Pearce said, he rings me up, I'm buzzing, like I said before, buzzing. And he said, Roy's not going to take you. But in the... Why is it funny?
It's not funny, Mike.
It's just fucking hilarious. I love it.
In the same conversation, Stuart Pearce said, I'm going to be taking the Olympic team. And that's when I said, okay, I won't go on standby for England. And then I'll go to the Olympics. But then the media said, Micah refuses to go on standby for his country. So I got all sorts of dogs abuse in the media, but that wasn't the case. I just wanted to go to the Olympics.
Yeah. So anyway, you're not quite the person to have on for his tribute, are you?
But I still respect him and I still love him. Just shows you the measure of a man that I am.
Yeah. He didn't have the squad though, Alan, did he really, with England at that point? It was probably I would say, Wayne Rooney aside, and Sterling possibly, they wasn't the best generation of England players. That's kind of come subsequently, hasn't it, with that emergence of so much young talent.
Yeah, I mean, what was the game? Was Iceland? Was it the game that was?
Yeah, that was the one that did for him, wasn't it?
That was a dreadful night for England and for him and for everyone who loves English football. It just, yeah, but you need, as well as being a really good coach, you do however good you are, you still need a little bit of luck at times,
Yep.
And in terms of having the right squad with the right attitudes at the right time. And no, that wasn't a good time for England. No, it wasn't England's best team.
Do you think he was an underdog coach?
What, in terms of what? Having a squad that you could sort of, I don't know, motivate or make better, or what do you mean?
So I'm talking about, it works at like a club like Crystal Palace, say they're playing big teams or the bigger clubs and stuff, but he could get that togetherness and that discipline, that kind of structure, a way of playing, rather than kind of a coach that would go at players. And I'm just thinking perhaps that why it didn't possibly work so much at Liverpool, for example, where they
possibly, yeah. When you've got to play on the front foot, haven't you? When you're Liverpool manager, you can't be sort of reserved, and you need to sit back and wait. You have to go out and attack, and that's the way that it has to be at those particular football clubs. That's not necessarily Roy's style, but you're also got to be dictated by who and what you've got available to you as a coach or as a manager.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we're going to talk to a Crystal Palace expert, Dan Cook, who's going to join us to talk beyond Roy Hodgson and about Crystal Palace, where they are, where they should be, where they're going to go next, and of course the incumbent new manager, who we believe will be Oliver Glasner. Welcome back to The Rest is Football with Micah Richards, Alan Shearer and me, Gary Lineker. And joining us for the second half, we've got a guest on, Dan Cook, who is host of the podcast Hopkin Looking to Curl One, which focuses purely on Crystal Palace. A warm welcome, Dan. Dan, we've had our say on Roy Hodgson. Obviously, he's been an integral part of the club in two spells over the last 6 or 7 seasons. What are your thoughts, and perhaps as a spokesperson of Crystal Palace fans, their thoughts on Roy Hodgson?
I think you have to temper it with the situation that he encountered when he first came in the first time around. For anyone that isn't particularly up to date with recent history in relation to Crystal Palace, he came in shortly after, or a few days after, Frank de Boer was relieved of his duties, and the club were reeling from that particular point. And he really did give us a sense of stability. He is a local lad. He is someone that has been around South London as a young man, and even though he has had such a vast and varied managerial career, I think he always had a real affinity with the club. And when he got the opportunity to take over, even though it wasn't in ideal circumstances given the start to the season we had, he brought a real sense of calmness to everybody and actually steered us to a very high finish in that first season. If you look at his return at the back end of the previous campaign, when Patrick Vieira was given his marching orders, he once again gave us that stability, and in that 10-game run, we won in our first game under him against Leicester, scored in the last minute at Selhurst, and it was a real sort of explosion of joy for everybody. And then from that point on, we went on to get wins away at Leeds and at Southampton in very fine fashion. And to be fair, this season has not gone to plan. I think every Crystal Palace fan knows that, and even if you're a neutral from the outside looking in, you can see that the results and the form has not been good enough. But that doesn't take away from the legacy that he undoubtedly has as a Crystal Palace manager and as someone that will always be a huge part of our history.
Yeah, and it'll always be, I presume, considered and given a lot of love by the Crystal Palace fans going forward. Yeah,
without a doubt. It's obviously a difficult thing to navigate, because if you look at the situation as things stand, the form that we've been in, any manager would be under pressure, regardless of their standing within the game or, their age, etc. But it has sort of led to a little bit of, I think, backlash towards the club for the manner in which this has come around. But if you actually look at the statement that has been released by Roy, it's so perfectly worded, and I think there's a real level of respect from him towards the club and vice versa. It's just not an ideal circumstance, I guess, that we have parted ways like this, because the plan was always for him to do one more year and then wave goodbye in the summer. But, I think everything about his statement is incredibly classy, and that sort of sums him up, really.
Hi, Dan. I was just about to say exactly the same thing in terms of that sort of sums Roy up, the class that he has both in football and out of football, because he's such a genuine, nice, honest man. What are your thoughts on people that have said, and I've heard them say it this afternoon, about it was a mistake to let Roy continue in this summer to go ahead with this season?
I think it is a difficult thing to nail down 100%, because if you look at the circumstances around when he first left the club and was of course replaced by Patrick Vieira, the squad at that point needed refreshing, it needed a more youthful feel to it, and we immediately signed players like Mark Gay, Joachim Andersen, Michael Elise. There was this injection of positivity via Patrick Vieira, but of course when that went sour, Roy Hodgson came back in. It wasn't necessarily a decision that many Palace fans expected, but I'm led to believe that it was a call that the players actually asked for themselves, because they knew about his training structure and the way that he could get them set up in a very solid fashion. I don't necessarily blame the hierarchy for bringing him back for a full campaign at the start of this season, because the form that we had at the back end of the previous campaign was so good, and the squad had been rejuvenated to such an extent that it felt as though he was able to, spread his wings somewhat and play potentially a more expansive style of football. He has been hamstrung massively by injuries to squad members. Chet Doucouré, who's a key part of our midfield, has been missing since November. I think it's 4 or 5 times that Michael Elise and Abir Eze have been able to start together. So he could quite rightly point towards that and say that he hasn't ever really been able to get the squad playing as it should be. But unfortunately, as everyone knows, it is a results business. And, if you look at the form, and this game this evening against Everton is absolutely huge for us in terms of a relegation battle. So, I don't think it's necessarily the wrong thing to make the change, but there is certainly no ill will held towards Roy Hodgson.
Yeah, it was interesting. Obviously, in recent weeks, we've seen some banners being lifted by some of the crowd behind the goal. Some dissatisfaction at perhaps the management and coaching side, and perhaps the overall running of the football club. Will this placate those supporters? I know it's come in unusual circumstances, because I think ideally the club wanted to get Roy to the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the situation as it stands, I think Crystal Palace, in many ways, we are a club that many people look at the squad and they think, well, they won't go down. Roy Hodgson will be the definition of stability. The squad's good enough to stay up. But we have gradually slipped further and further towards the relegation zone. And in this particular instance, the games against Arsenal, we lost that and we fell behind after 2 minutes. Against Brighton, we set up relatively defensively once again, fell behind in 2 minutes from a set piece. This isn't something that is a knee-jerk feeling for Crystal Palace fans. And again, there is nuance to it. I don't think I blame the board personally for bringing him back in the summer. But when you do that and you pretty much give the impression that you are going to be treading water figuratively for 12 months, there is always going to be a sense that we should be kicking on. And I think that has bled into the way the fans view things. That said, everything about the seemingly imminent appointment of Oliver Glasner is something that, the Crystal Palace fans are infused by. And I don't think we should necessarily be beaten around the head for feeling enthusiastic about that, because, he's a Europa League winning manager and someone that hopefully will be able to inject a real sense of momentum into the squad again.
Yeah, Oliver Glasner is from my understanding, it's not been announced yet, but I think it might be by the time this podcast goes out later this evening. I understand he's been appointed now, and that will be announced imminently. He's got a decent track record, of course, with Eintracht Frankfurt, a runner-up in the German Cup, and also won the Europa League. So It's a movement on. Do you think the fans will be excited by his appointment?
Without a doubt. I mean, obviously I can't speak for every club in the league, but when you've got a team that are flirting with a potential relegation battle, or in one, depending on how this game this evening against Everton goes, to be able to go out into the market and appoint a manager that has won a Europa League as recently as 2022 feels like a significant coup. And, if he wants to come in and build the club, hopefully he can come in and really get us playing in the first 5 or 6 games and stave off any worries of potential relegation, and then we can kick on from there. It's an appointment that certainly fills me with enthusiasm. I know plenty of people have been burnt by the Frank de Boer appointment prior to Roy coming in the first time, but we can't just go with tried and tested Premier League managers forever. I think this is a roll of the dice, but it feels like an educated one to me.
Why is it that the fans of I don't think it's a mutiny as such. I don't think it's that far spread. It doesn't seem like an Everton situation from previous years. But perhaps people like ourselves, we look at a club like Crystal Palace and we see it as consider it's not state-owned or anything like that. It seems like a pretty well-run club that's been very stable. It's stayed in the Premier League. Is there perhaps... Do you think they're wishing for more than is actually realistically possible or not? Fans will always do that to an extent.
I always feel as though this is something, and it's no one's fault necessarily if you're looking from the outside in. There's this assumption that, should be careful what you wish for, etc., etc. But I say it time and again, Crystal Palace fans don't expect trophies. We don't even expect European football. I would argue, alongside Fulham, we're potentially the biggest club in England to have never won a major trophy. You don't get into supporting this club for glory, by definition. We want to see a long-term plan that is put in place, not necessarily to play free-flowing football, but with the Category 1 academy that we have, we want to see a pathway there for young players to come through and really make their mark, because South London is a real hotbed of talent, and we all know that. It's something that has been spoken about, not just in South London, but countrywide. And even though Roy Hodgson has done a fantastic job for us across these 2 spells, because of the nature of that appointment, and indeed the ownership structure with John Textor, Steve Parish, 2 other Americans who previously had been linked with a potential move to buy Chelsea, I think the fan base are just feeling as though it's a little bit fractured at the moment, and we want to get back the sense of unity that we had, back in 2013 when we won promotion to the Premier League, when it felt as though everyone was on the same page and pulling in the same direction, rather than having these different sort of pots that are, sapping energy, shall we say.
Obviously, fans don't have control on who owns it and which. So how do you get that back?
I mean, it is a difficult thing, obviously. If you look at John Textor individually, he has a multi-club model. He owns Molenbeek over in Belgium, he owns Botafogo in Brazil, he owns Lyon in France, and he has come in, and from everything that has been reported in the press, he wants to make a splash, he wants to make big signings. He has already put a significant amount of money into the club. I personally am a huge fan of Steve Parish, I always have been, but there is this sense of worry, I suppose you can say, from the fan base that the ideas of John Textor and Steve Parish are butting heads up against one another. Obviously, we don't know if that is the case. There's obviously a lot that goes on behind the scenes that will never be reported fully. But that in itself is something which has led to a sense of dissatisfaction amongst the fans. And I think if this appointment goes well and we can, go hopefully into the summer as a Premier League club and make progressive signings, get a few more young players into the team and feel as though everyone is back singing from the same hymn sheet rather than this situation where the boards seem to be at each other's throats, then I think the club and fan base will be a lot happier than they were 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Just on that, Dan, you mentioned the signings potentially in the summer. For Crystal Palace, what sort of signings would you be looking at or be happy with? Because you're obviously fighting against the likes of Wolves, who are doing really good now, and Brighton, and those sort of criteria teams.
I mean, again, we don't expect big money signings. We went down that route. We had Mamadou Sakho and Christian Benteke come in from Liverpool in the space of 12 months for a combined £60 million, and it didn't work out well for us because they're huge money for a club of our size, and there's next to no resale value. If you look at Mark Gay, you look at Elise, you look at Abir Eze, even if you look at Adam Walton, who we signed on the last day of the January window from Blackburn, they are signings that have high potential, that are high quality footballers, have resale value. The whole process of our transfer strategy over the last 2 or 3 years has been to try and get those players in and then sell them at the optimum time. I would suggest this summer is probably the first summer in which we will see one or potentially potentially 2 high-profile departures, obviously as long as we stay in the Premier League, and then using the transfer budget alongside the amount of money that is generated from those sales, hopefully we can continue to go into the market and get young players in that can grow with us, and not necessarily put them in the shop window, but provide them a platform in the Premier League to play in a London-based club that hopefully have a style of football that suits them. I think that really, I can't speak for every Palace fan, but it's certainly what I would like to see moving forward happen more and more.
Yeah, I know they've been injured quite a bit this season, haven't really played together that much, but how exciting for a Crystal Palace fan is it to watch Eze and Elise? Wonderful talent.
I mean, yeah, they're both absolutely incredible. And to be honest, when they're playing together, they dovetail in a way that is just magical to watch at times. You know, every Premier League footballer is obviously supremely talented, but you see the sort of telepathy between the two of them when they are really clicking, and you realise that there is another level or two that the pair of them can go to. And speaking specifically about Michael Elise, you know, he was fantastic when he came in from Reading initially, but this season, even though it has been an injury-blighted campaign, he has gone up another level or 3. It's quite incredible what he's able to do. He scored 1 goal away at Luton, albeit we did lose that game, but it was almost as if he was in the playground and decided he was going to grab the ball and just do it himself. He beat 2 or 3 men on the flank, cut inside and put it in the top corner. He is a truly elite footballer, and hopefully if he does move on, he will go on to play at the very top of the game. I would expect him to be able to, and Abire Eze as well.
I tipped that to be goal of the season. The following day, Garnacho did that overhead kick, which was doomed. Yeah. I suppose, I mean, I'm a Leicester fan, obviously, so I know what it's like. It's kind of similar. When you get great players, great young players like that, you kind of, you want them to play wonderfully, but when they play wonderfully, you know that someone's going to take them off you.
It is a very difficult situation to be in. And, you know, you look at our academy, by definition, we had Aaron Wan-Bissaka. He came through our academy. He was with us for roughly a year as a first-team player, and then he goes off to Manchester United. You know, £50 million, helps the club hugely financially. But even with the transfer strategy we have now, we have to be realistic that players like Elise, Gay, Eze, they're not coming to Crystal Palace to be here for life. They want to be able to play in a system that works for them, help the club along the way, and then go for a vast sum of money, hopefully, but obviously move on. And it is a mindset that you have to get yourself into, because realistically, without, you know, a state backing us as a football club, we're not going to be able to hold on to those players for the entirety of their career.
Yeah. Before I let you go, Dan, by the time this goes out, it'll probably be around kick-off at Goodison Park. Confident or worried?
I'm absolutely, I don't know whether I could swear on this podcast, nervous, shall we say. To be fair, I was just going to say I was bricking it, to be honest. Our record against Everton is absolutely horrendous in recent years anyway. I don't know if you remember, but the game that Frank Lampard kept Everton up in, we were 2-0 up in that game and somehow managed to lose that, and it ended up with Patrick Vieira kicking an Everton fan on the pitch as they invaded. So it has some pretty bad memories for us in recent times. And to be honest, you know, as a Crystal Palace fan, we know what a galvanising effect points deductions can actually have on a football club. We had one in 2010. We ended up surviving on the last day of the season at Hillsborough that year. And it really brought the whole club together, and I feel like Everton at the moment under Sean Dyche are in sort of not the perfect position, but they really are pulling in the same direction. And, you know, a Monday night game under the floodlights at Goodison, I'm just not particularly confident, but who knows, maybe, you know, they will want to send Roy off.
So you take a point now then?
I'll take a point immediately. I'll take a 0-0 like that.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, thank you very much. As someone who did actually shit himself, you can say I'm shitting myself on this podcast.
Well, there we go. I'll let you do it for me, Gary.
Thanks for joining us. And don't forget, particularly Crystal Palace fans, Hopkin Looking to Curl One is Dan's pod. And thanks very much for joining us. That's it for our special episode. Goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me. Thanks, Dan.
Cheers.
Cheers, Dan. That was excellent. Really good.
Excellent.
Yes.